In the early 2000s, a couple named Sarah and James were returning from a weekend getaway in a remote part of the country. The route they took included a dark, winding highway, infamous for its ghost story. As they drove, they noticed a dense fog beginning to envelop the road, reducing visibility to mere feet. Suddenly, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, partially obscured by the fog. Sarah and James were initially hesitant, decided to stop and check if the figure needed help. As they approached, the figure appeared to be a woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face indistinct and shrouded in shadow. When they got within a few feet of her, the figure abruptly vanished into thin air. The couple, now deeply unnerved, hurried back to their car and continued driving. Throughout the remainder of their journey, they experienced a series of unexplained phenomena. Cold spots in the car, eerie whispers, a sense of being watched. When they finally reached their destination, they decided to investigate the local legends associated with the highway. They discovered that the area was infamous for sightings of a ghostly woman who had reportedly died in a tragic accident decades earlier. Witnesses had described similar encounters, seeing the figure of a woman in distress only for her to disappear without a trace. Sarah and James's experience seemed to fit perfectly into the folklore, leaving them with a haunting story to tell. It was a late, moonless night when I decided to take a shortcut home through a rural road I hadn't traveled before. I'd been working late and was eager to get home, so when the GPS signal started fading, I shrugged it off. The road seemed to twist endlessly through the dense forest, trees forming a suffocating canopy above me. The eerie silence of the night was occasionally broken by the sound of my tires crunching over the gravel. After driving for what felt like hours, I spotted a faint glow through the trees. Curiosity piqued, I slowed down and saw an old, decrepit cabin standing among the foliage. It looked out of place in the otherwise untouched wilderness. The cabin was surrounded by overgrown vegetation, and the once white paint was peeling away, revealing the rot beneath. A rusty sign by the side of the road read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," though the letters were barely legible. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I parked the car and approached the cabin. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, the musty smell of mold and decay. Dust covered every surface, and old newspapers were scattered across the floor, their headlines long forgotten. The only light came from the beam of my flashlight, which danced across the dark interior. As I moved further into the cabin, a chill ran down my spine. There was something profoundly unsettling about the place. In the back room, I saw a figure through a crack in the wall. It was hard to make out clearly, but it appeared to be a person standing in the window. I felt a sudden wave of dread. The figure seemed to be watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I approached the window cautiously, trying to get a better look. The figure remained motionless, its face obscured by the darkness. My heart raced, and I felt an irrational urge to flee. I turned to leave, but the door I had entered through was now firmly shut. Panic set in. I tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The figure in the window seemed to be growing more menacing, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my brow. Desperate to escape, I searched for another exit and found a window at the back of the cabin. I struggled with it until it finally gave way, allowing me to squeeze through and tumble into the forest. I sprinted back to my car, the dark forest closing in around me. The sound of my footsteps and the crunch of leaves seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I jumped into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin was still visible in the distance, figure still standing at the window. My heart pounded as I accelerated, trying to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, and no matter how fast I drove, the cabin remained in sight until I reached a main road. When I finally merged onto the well-lit road, the cabin and the figure vanished from view. I pulled over, trying to calm my racing heart. I looked back, but the road behind me was clear, with no sign of the cabin or the figure. The unsettling experience left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. In the days that followed, I tried to find the road on maps and GPS, but it was as if the road had disappeared along with the cabin. I could never find any reference to Hollow Creek or the cabin. The image of the figure watching me from the window haunted my dreams for weeks. Every time I drove through that area, couldn't shake the feeling something was lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next visitor. Sam was on his way home from a late-night shift, driving through an abandoned stretch of highway known for its eerie stillness. As the clock ticked past midnight, fog rolled in, enveloping the road in a thick white blanket. He squinted through the windshield, barely able to see the lines on the road. Suddenly, a dilapidated toll booth appeared out of the mist. Sam frowned. He knew this highway didn't have a toll. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pulled up to the booth where an old man with a tattered uniform, a ghostly, hollow-eyed stare waited. $2, the old man said, extending a trembling hand. Sam hesitated but handed over the money. The old man didn't move, stood there, eyes locked on Sam. As Sam drove past, the fog thickened and the scenery began to distort. The road twisted unnaturally, trees morphing into grotesque shapes. Desperation set in as Sam tried to turn around, but every direction seemed to loop back to the same spot. Finally, he saw the toll booth again, but this time it was in worse condition. Cobwebs and decay had overtaken it. The old man was gone, replaced by a note, "You're never leaving." Panicking, Sam slammed the gas pedal, but the fog enveloped him completely, and the car's engine sputtered and died. Hours later, a highway patrol found Sam's abandoned car. Inside, the money was still in the toll booth's cash drawer, and Sam was nowhere to be found. Fog had disappeared, but the toll booth remained, untouched by time. Lena had always taken the same route home from her late-night job, a highway that led through a dense forest. One night, she noticed a new exit sign that hadn't been there before. Curiosity piqued. She took the exit, thinking it would be a shortcut. The road was narrow and overgrown, but she pressed on, determined to find her way back to the main road. The trees seemed to close in on her, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. Her headlights barely cut through the oppressive darkness. After what felt like hours, Lena came upon an old farmhouse, decrepit and abandoned. She slowed down, peering through the cracked windows. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Someone was watching her from inside. She couldn't make out their face, but the figure was unmistakably human. Her heart raced as she sped away from the farmhouse, only to find that the road seemed to loop back to it. Every attempt to leave led her back to the same sinister house. The figure in the window grew clearer each time, its face a twisted mask of malevolence. Eventually, Lena's car ran out of gas. Stranded, she saw the farmhouse's door creak open. The figure emerged, moving toward her with unnatural speed. Lena bolted into the forest, but the darkness swallowed her. Days later, her car was found, keys still in the ignition, but Lena had vanished without a trace.